Right. I think we'll make a start, and hopefully anyone else will jump in and join us. So tēnā koutou katoa, ko Claire Coleman tōku ingoa, kia ora this afternoon, and welcome. I'm going to start this over with karakia, and I have picked a new one, so please forgive me if my pronunciation is not fabulous, and now I've lost it. Where's it gone?
I can start us off.
Why don't you? Let's try that.
Kia kara kia tātou, tutua mai runga, tutua mai raro, tutua mai roto, tutua mai waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, haumi e hui e tai ki e.
Thank you, Lian. Okay, so welcome this afternoon. Appreciate that. I don't know where my karakia just disappeared to. So we are here to look and talk about the Phase 5 Sciences subjects. And as ever, just to explain how the session kind of works, I'm going to plonk you through a PowerPoint and some resource that I've made that kind of speaks to the survey questions for this consultation around some of the science subjects. And then my lovely esteemed guest is going to chime in on bits and pieces. Everything will go up online pretty shortly after the webinar finishes, and the links to the Gamma site I will post into the chat now. And the idea is that we have it all kind of done and dusted in 30 minutes or so. So we'll try and keep things tight, and I will chivvy things along as needed. Again, before I hand over to Lian to introduce himself, I also just want to acknowledge that these bits and pieces and resources have been created with the great wisdom of others who are in the science community, and not me, who is not a science teacher. And so they are kind of a culmination of a few people who've come and lent me their expertise with very, very quickly, given the speed with which this consultation is being rolled out. So they are not just my musings. Okay. Maybe I'll turn to Lian, if you could just introduce yourself, and I will...
Yeah. Kia ora katoa, ko Lian Soh tōku ingoa, he kākau pūtaio ahau I Tauranga Moana. I'm a science teacher in the Tauranga area. I also run a local science teachers association called Base Science, and I'm also the regional representative for the Chemistry Educators Association, and also for NZASC in the Bay of Plenty. Lovely to be here today. Feeling really, really, really nervous coming on here and needing to talk about what looks to be a massive volume of material for just a few people to consider here tonight. But, we've got less than 30 minutes to go. We've got a short consultation time frame to get through. So passing the ball back to you, Claire, to awhi us along.
Okay. Kara, thank you for that. And so the PowerPoint I've put in the chat is here. It's only a couple of slides, but it clicks through to a bunch of extra resources. So I thought before I sort of show you all of those bits and pieces, maybe Lian, do you want to just give us a kind of quick 2 minutes, 3 minutes, big overview of kind of what you're seeing, big picture around the sciences subjects?
Yeah. So first thing off the top that my first impression is of Year 11, there's already way too much in there to cover in a year. I think even if you had the beginning of Term 1 all the way through to the end of Term 4, and we're not talking like current senior Term 4, where the Year 11s go away for exam leave, but all the way until when like Year 9s and 10s finish, there is a lot of stuff to cover. And then when we look into Year 12 and 13, yesterday afternoon, I just tried to map a few of Year 12 and 13, all of the Year 12 and 13 of chemistry, physics, bio, ESS, and Ag Hort against those 10 elements that were present through phases 1 to 4. And we're looking at something which is really, really top-heavy in the senior level. And there's lots of little bottlenecks and lots of knowledge gaps from phase 1 to 4 as well. So those are just kind of my first impressions so far. But also the fact that we've got, physics, chem, bio, ESS, and Ag Hort Noticeably absent is Year 12 and 13 general science as well, which I know that some of our local teachers here in the Bay of Plenty would actually like to see as a subject as well.
Okay, thank you, Lian. So, before I just take you through this PowerPoint and we sort of delve into some of the questions, I think it's worth just recognizing that obviously phases 1 to 4 and the draft and the consultation period for that only finished at the end of April. And so this material for phase 5 hasn't really been related to that phase 1 to 4 material. So there is going to be an issue, obviously, people thinking about how does the progression work? How do these things, flow on from one another when that, obviously this work was being developed whilst 1 to 4 was still and is still currently in draft. So there is that continuity issue, and I think that's something that people have identified already. All right, so on the website, again, there's just nice clickable buttons to show you where to find everything to do your consultation. If you click over here, you'll find this takes you to Taharangi, where all the materials are available. Again, you have to scroll down to get to the PDFs that you need to download to have a look at your subject or subjects. And it is just a click and download a big PDF and have a look at that. We'll go back here. Then if you look at the consultation survey document, just something to note here is that it is one big long survey. So it'll ask you to do it, and then it'll say, do you want to do another subject? Do you want to do another subject? It just keeps going until I think it's 10 subjects you can comment on in one submission. I don't know, and I have asked whether or not, it's kind of going to count you out if you make one submission on one subject and then go back later and trying to make another one, whether or not that, they sort of look at your email address and say, no, you've done one. I don't know. But I would hope that's not the case, because obviously this is quite a bit to have people thinking about, and they might be ready to talk on one subject and then want to come back later and go through the process again. But yes, it is a much shorter piece of survey than the draft 1 to 4 consultation. And the questions are fairly restricted in terms of what they're asking you to do. But as many of you probably found if you engaged with any of the consultation before, there is some space to upload some of your feedback as well. So it might be worth collating feedback separately and doing that part and putting the effort into that if you find the survey themselves not really helping you out. So we'll move through the snapshot summary. We'll continue. And I'll just turn to you, Leon, to have a look at bits and pieces. So, the other thing to notice when you look at the survey is a lot of the questions are recorded by a sliding scale. So it goes from I don't agree to I strongly agree, and there's sort of a middle, and there's sort of a not applicable, I don't know category. And what I've done here, just to try and make it easier, is I've actually put down kind of what, as I said, our expert group that have contributed to these slides felt about these the answers to these questions. And this is not me trying to tell you how to answer them, but it's just to give you, I guess, a kind of overarching guide about how some people are feeling about it, and then some of the reasoning why. So we'll move through to that. So the first question is really about the visual element, the pathways element, which is that sort of little section that tells you how you might move through phase 5 from years 11 to 13 and how that might help you decide what you're going to be doing. Lian, do you want to talk about the usefulness of that, which we kind of thought was a maybe?
Absolutely. So in terms of pathways, I think, so we got our phase 5 released on the 15th, and then on a Saturday we got the announcement that Year 11 science was going to be compulsory. Now that does, I think, have some implications in terms of what the purpose of Year 11 is. Like if we're saying everything from Year 1 through to Year 11 is a must-have and must-know for every New Zealand citizen in New Zealand, what is some of the science that is actually essential for all New Zealanders? And so when you open the phase 5 draft for Year 11 science, I've got it in front of me, but you only really need to go 2 pages in and you end up with a table in terms of so these are your future professional pathways. There's engineering, commerce, law and society, creative and cultural industries, digital and data systems, food and primary systems, all those sorts of things. And sure, like if we're saying that, we want year 11 science to be compulsory because this is the professional pathway we want you to be on, well, what about the citizenship pathway? What about the students that don't want to take on those sorts of jobs after high school? So maybe keep those in mind. So here in the responding to survey questions for the website that Claire has put together, we've got in here that we've got this idea of preparing year 11 students for year 12 to 13. 20 to 25% will probably actually continue. I think that's based on an NZCER paper. But then at the same time, what about the 75 to 80% of students? We've got to remember that under this potential new assessment framework that we have, that is that could be replacing NCA is, well, we've got an exam for English and then also maths. There's no assessment to kind of signal what's important for the other subjects, including science as well. So what about the other 75 to 80% of students that are basically forced into your year 11 science class? What can we do for them as well?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, as I said, the survey question is just a sliding scale. Do you think it's helpful or not helpful? But I think what we're trying to do in this session is unpack what might you want to say more about that. And again, you have to wait to the end of the survey, although it is quite short, to upload your thoughts around that. All right, so the next one in question 6 is talking about the strands. Do they accurately represent the associated knowledge and practice statements? And I apologize, this is a bit wordy, but essentially our panel did not agree that it did represent them. I thought it pretty interesting myself as a non-science person to think that Earth and space science didn't have any space science in it, which seemed quite a strange thing to do. And so that was one of the chief, criticisms, I guess. And then this idea that the practices were sort of just a big long list of things rather than thinking about scientific practice. And some of the continuity issues around what the work is or what hasn't been done in phases 1 to 4. Lian, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Well, so on the point you just brought up about the Earth and space science, like, yes, it's called Earth and space. And when you actually map year 11 against phases 1 to 4, if you look through the year 11 stuff, there's no astronomy in year 11. Let that sink in for a while. There's no astronomy in year 11. And actually, when you try to map against some of the other elements from phases 1 to 4, ecology is pretty weak in there as well. Year 11 kind of takes the segue into genetics, which sure is still important if you're on that year 12 to 13 pre-professional pathway into a STEM career. But what about ecology? What about the predator-free 2050 stuff? What about the dune planting at the coast? That's literally just like less than a couple of kilometers from my house right here. In terms of the chemistry stuff, in terms of the bullet points that we have in year 11, there's not a lot in there, but don't let that trick you. I had a look today in year 11 in materials. We were talking about ionic bonding, covalent bonding. It's almost a little bit like a slightly diluted, washed down version of year 12 structure and bonding. It's quite dense. So I don't think even counting the bullet points is enough in this instance for year 11 to 13. You've got to actually look at each bullet point and think about how heavy it actually is in terms of how much time it's going to take out of your classroom. We did a big analysis from phase 1 to phase 4 before the when was phase 4 due for consultation? Sometime back on like March or something like that.
Yeah.
And we identified lots of knowledge gaps in there as well. There's entire years where electricity appears in somewhere in like year 7 and year 8, and then like never again until much later on down the track. And it's little things like that probably shouldn't make it into a public draft, but it still has.
Okay. Question 7. The subject description aligns well with the knowledge and practice statements. So this was some strong disagreement from the group on this one, particularly around the idea that the paper statement made some quite impressive claims, but they weren't actually evident in the teaching sequence. And I know this was a criticism that we had around some of the content in phases 1 to 4 as well. And then the glaring lack of Mātauranga Māori and commitment to culturally responsive science being there. And I guess the way that the formatting may potentially imply a kind of transmission model of learning that's not something that would keep pace with current research. And a feeling that, as I said, the purpose statement made some really interesting, said some really interesting things potentially, and made some big claims. But there was no enactment of that through the rest of the document. Lian?
Yeah. So, in terms of the purpose statement, it's quite interesting because we've got the whakatauki mā te whakaaro nui e hanga te whare mā te mātauranga e whakau. By great thought, the house is built. By knowledge, it is made firm. Now, I'm aware that this is the same as the whakatauki that is from NZC 07. I'm not expert enough to know where that has come from. But something that people picked up in the phase 1 to 4 feedback when we ran a workshop in the Bay of Plenty was that when you Google search that whakatauki, the first thing that pops up is that it's a biblical kind of quote. And so again, I'm not expert enough on this, but in terms of our New Zealand's history, in terms of Māori culture, and in terms of, I suppose, for lack of a better word, the oppression, the suppression of that culture is something that's based on a biblical quote appropriate. And then at the same time, do science teachers really want something that might trace back to a religious context as being the whakatauki for their purpose statement? Again, I'm not sure. Maybe there's another story behind where this whakatauki has come from. In terms of, by great thought, the house is built, by knowledge, it is made firm. The question has been put out there over the past couple of months. Whose knowledge? Right? Whose knowledge? In terms of the way that year 12 and 13 is, physics, chemistry, biology, earth and space, ag hort, probably earth and space and ag hort are probably a little bit more multidisciplinary compared to physics, chemistry, and biology. But, when we think about the research system in New Zealand, in terms of some of the things that Māori researchers have found really difficult, it's the siloed approach towards gaining research funding that's been really, really, really difficult. And I think that was something that was highlighted in a Vision Mātauranga booklet or some sort of publications some years ago. And so what are we perpetuating when we still have the siloization of physics, chemistry, and biology? Now, I'm not saying that these are bad in terms of the disciplinary identity of senior chemistry, but what I'm probably saying is that actually, if we don't have general science, then how are we catering to a multicultural approach to science, which is the way of how we understand the natural world, right? So in terms of this purpose statement, we kind of need to go we need something that's a bit broader. And, jumping back to, just a few minutes ago, something that doesn't just cater to the students that want to go on to some kind of STEM career pathway, but something for citizenship as well. So where's the part about making decisions about nutrition and diet? Where's the part about whether or not you should get your flu vaccine or not? Where's the part about whether or not you should plant more native trees in your backyard or take on backyard trapping? Those are the things that are missing. So if we're saying from year 1 to year 11, this is compulsory, then surely some of these things need to be in there as well. Not just for the citizenship aspect, but for the economic benefit, basically to all New Zealand when the everyday citizen can take on these sorts of skills and things. That's kind of my thoughts anyway. I'll be interested to hear what the audience thinks as well.
Okay, we're going to press on though, Lian, because time is running away. Okay, question 8 asks about the knowledge and practice statements being appropriate for this level, and that was kind of like, again, there was a bit of, some of it's familiar because it draws on existing NCA standards, and I think this speaks to what you were saying again, Lian, about the science, the kind of foundations of, the epistemic and procedural. How do we know how to make scientific, how do we know something in the science world? how are we engaging and thinking through these things with a scientific kind of lens? And that stuff is missing, which again seems strange if now as a year 11 science is compulsory for all learners. The quantity of the content heavy, again, 279 bullet points. Somebody did the maths there. And then some of the content, and speaks to that, I guess, that general science stuff that's coming out around for the soil chemistry and stuff, is that need to know, must know stuff for everybody across the country, regardless of their interest or their, going forward in those areas. I'm going to give you 1 minute, Leon, on that one.
Yep. Okay. So, in terms of all of basically what you just said, so something that has been missing from phase 1 to 4 is the nature of science. The nature of science, in terms of how do we know this, what's the evidence for this, that is the sort of thing that we need, in an age where there's not just misinformation and disinformation, but also generated information in the form of AI. That is just part of the 21st century skills that we need everyone to have. The procedural knowledge, the epistemic knowledge, all of those things speak to the nature of science. And when we did our phase 1 to 4 feedback, those were all the statements that were missing from years 1 through to 10. And I imagine they are still missing in year 11 to 13 as well.
Indeed. All right. Question 9. So, knowledge and practice statements are sequenced to support progression. So, again, this is an area that the group strongly disagreed with. And actually, there were some real issues around the progression going backwards or being incoherent. There's concern about some just repetition of content and a narrowing rather than a deepening. The agri-court subject being kind of a completely new thing, meaning there was no sort of prior foundation for that. So, it's a huge leap. And then the sort of logic across the strands. So, in terms of being able to integrate, being able to make connections, both within the learning area of science, between the science subjects, and then potentially anywhere else, is left kind of hanging. There's no easy way to look at the coherence of those two things. And then, as I said, that idea of kind of a list of stuff. And this comment, again, I think is going back to that idea about who's it meeting the needs for. I'm going to push through this, Leon, just because of time. So things that are missing. This is our last one? Not quite. So things that are missing that we've identified. Mātauranga Māori, nature of science, the idea of science as a human endeavour, a human interaction, the kind of cross-cutting concepts that we don't have. Inquiry and investigation, a focus not only on just doing things, but how you go about doing those things. As we said, space science is missing. And then some of the contemporary scientific things. Then, do you want to talk to that, the contemporary stuff?
I guess something that's kind of, and I kind of know this because my partner's a biology teacher and she talks about this a lot. But the idea of like epigenetics and new gene technologies. What's coming out also, on a side note on genetics, in the media right now, it's the de-extinction of the moa. But in terms of what we're seeing from phase 1 through to phase 5 inclusive, is the social scientific issue stuff still in there? I don't think it is. In terms of chemistry, the Royal Society of Chemistry overseas published something not too long ago. It was a 3-part report, and in the 3rd part, they basically said that actually chemistry curriculums across the world, we're not doing enough in terms of our sustainability or green chemistry in there. Do we see any of that in year 12 and 13? I don't think so. I saw titrations in there, but I didn't see much of green chemistry or sustainability. When to me, actually, chemistry is a materials and a substances science. Like it is matter cycling. Like if we are going to come up with solutions that deal with things like microplastics, with recyclability to circular economies, that is a chemistry issue. And so how can that be missing from year 12 and 13? And then contemporary scientific developments in terms of, I suppose, systems thinking. We know that climate change is this massive thing, and that each year that goes by, new evidence comes out. Things change, and the evidence changes the way that we understand the climate change polycrisis system. So it goes back to that idea of the nature of science, that it's not just a list of facts, but that our understanding of the world changes over time as well. It all goes back to the nature of science. We need the nature of science, and it needs to be there in year 12 and 13 as well.
All right. Right, we are last question. So the last question before it invites you to contribute your own stuff is around, are they designed to be inclusive and accessible for all students? So again, this was an area that the group strongly disagreed with, talking about the idea around, locally responsive teaching and the importance of that pedagogical approach for connecting with learners. And because of all of the content heavy stuff that's been mandated, there's no room for that work. The kind of curiosity, student-driven inquiry, again, because there's so much of it and it's positioned in such a kind of didactic way, pedagogically, and not really being in line with international movements and other jurisdictions that are trying to be more inclusive and have more Indigenous knowledges and think about how we engage students in science that is relevant to and considers the social element as well. And again, one of the comments was that it doesn't reflect Aotearoa at all and is extremely Western. And I'll say one more thing that was said to me about this too, was that a lot of the content was could have been taught 50 years ago. It's not evolved and moving, and that isn't good. I guess it's not future focused, or in fact, in some ways, current. Lian, you've got 1 minute.
And 59 and 58 and 57. Look, I'm not sure what else to really add to this, other than, I don't think there's anyone in the audience that kind of goes against the idea of locally responsive teaching. But, I've heard through some of the science teacher circles that in terms of, putting stuff out there by the ministry, like in terms of whether or not it's appropriate to include local context, well, hang on, stop for a second. Predator Free 2050 is a national initiative, but in every single region and place around the country, there are lots of local conservation groups. In terms of climate change, are you saying that no one locally, in my neighborhood can make the personal decisions to respond to that? In terms of, sorting your rubbish when you put it out every week, that is a part of matter cycling. Why do we bother? Putting sorting out our glass, sorting out our plastics, because it is more energy efficient to recycle than it is to start a new quarry and then process all those petrol-based chemicals into new plastics. Can we please get a science curriculum that actually acknowledges the world that we currently live in, and which students are essentially inheriting? I think there's a proverb out there, and I don't think it's a New Zealand-based proverb. It's something along the lines of how young people aren't inheriting the world from us, but that we are actually borrowing that from young people as adults. So I might just leave you guys with that. And then in terms of, what you think of year 11, 12, and 13, sure, the university pathway is important, but when year 11 science is compulsory, think about what is it that every single New Zealander needs now that science might be mandated from year 1 through to year 11.
Okay, we are 5:01. I'm just going to reshare the screen with you again, just to go back to that base document. That the link is in the chat, just to highlight that I have also done a summary of the biology subject. I did get some feedback around that, which looks very similar. It's got, same sort of layout where I've gone through the questions, and we didn't get to look at that in the webinar, but please go and have a look at that if you are interested in commenting on the biology curriculum. Again, there's a bit of extra reading. There's a nice science learning article that I've just read this morning which is thinking very much about that future orientation and thinking about what science we need for the potential, future. The future's unknown, and the types of sort of critical thinking and creativity and imagination that we're going to need to think about how to address things we cannot yet imagine ourselves. So, and also some lovely work from Bay Science. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I am going to close out with my karakia. that I have now found for at least closing us out. And thank you for your time. And as I said, everything will pop up on the Substack, and I will also post it up to my other draft curriculum stuff, where you can find all the 1 to 4 phase stuff as well if you want to go back and have a look at that. Kia tāna manakitanga e te mea ngaro ki runga ki tēnā a tātou, kia mahia te mua matimahi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te araha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūtoru ka whakamau ki te tina. Hauye tākie.
Tākie.
Both together, forward together. Thank you, everybody. Ka kite, have a good rest of your evening.
Ko Mārie.